The simulation is programmed to last 7,344 years precisely to 2106 Common Era, or 85 years from today. From outside this holography, this 7344-year period in 3 periods of 2448 years each actually occurs in a very short time, hours or days. To those personalities inside the holography, the experience follows the protocols of real time outside the simulacrum, so we experience life inside with no shortcuts, long days and lives.
And what I'm telling you is that this has already happened. While it will happen again in the future, the reason why the future is known is because it already occurred in the past. The Cro-Magnon people have already suffered the exact same fate. It's why we found them in the caves. It's why they expressed themselves the only way they had left. After the collapse of their entire infrastructure, what was left to do but hunt, eat, and paint the most elaborate mosaics and beautiful pieces of art in caves found all around the Mediterranean world.
We have previously shown how so many ancient calendars and civilization start dates began all around 3100 BC. In fact, archaeologists have marveled at the sudden transition from Neolithic culture to full-fledged civilization in Egypt at this time.
The Anuna, I'm going to tell you now in one sentence that sums up the entire Anunnaki history. But we're going to continue on and answer the questions. The problem with understanding who the Anuna is that we try to compartmentalize that data and think that they are someone separate from ourselves, and they are not. We are Anuna, and I have said this in multiple videos. We are the blood descendants of the very race that came here and then intermarried among everyone that was already here. There is no distinction anymore. It's been thousands of years.
The 1986 discoveries of the Fontbrego cave in France have yielded evidence that Cro-Magnon man had also engaged in cannibalism. Humans were butchered, processed, raw meat stripped off the bones, which were then broken to extract the marrow. Concerning our 3895 BC Phoenix Cataclysm pole ship, we have testimony from Plato in the Statesman. In the fullness of time, when the change was to take place and the earth-born race had all perished, the pilot of the universe let the helm go, reverse the motion of the world, and the world turning round with a sudden shock, being impelled in an opposite direction from the beginning to end, was shaken by a mighty earthquake, which wrought a new destruction of all manner of animals. Much of the Greek concept of mankind's beginning was borrowed from Egypt and the Near East, necessarily so, as no Caucasian, Aryan, Semitic people yet existed. To Plato, who knew that gods in the heavens made all the races of mankind, the older races of non-Homo sapien pedigree were regarded as earthborn. In his time period, the designations Neanderthal, Cro-Magnon, Homo inferior were unknown. This pole shift catastrophe is a fact of geology, paleobotany, geography, and other disciplines, though it is hardly remembered in human memory. Many of our historical accounts prior to the 20th century BC were recorded retrospectively through transmission of oral testimony, or, as will be shown, revealed to literate humans by non-human benefactors, sometimes over 1,000 years after the events occurred.
And they counted those because the years were unknown. In all ancient manuscripts across the board, I have shown you in the Archaix presentations that the years were unknown to ancient cultures. They didn't factor them, didn't care. It was the days. Later it became the months. Then it was the years, only after the vapor canopy fell and the sun was clearly visible in the sky.
They quickly went to work against all the designs and plans of the Anuna. Since their beginning, they have always used race and culture to create divisiveness. But the Anuna and the Neolithic hunter-gatherers they ruled over possessed something the Igigi nor their descendants ever had. The explosive genius of creative potential that comes from being a spiritual immortal. One contained in a simulated holography and not a mere programmed intelligence. I will never try to tell you that there was not a technologically advanced civilization in the ancient past, because there was. As a matter of fact, there was probably 2 or 3 of them before we get to the modern period. But there's just no evidence of ancient aliens, guys. That's all psyop. That's all Hollywood. Everything's happening underground. All right. Technology, historical records, and manufacturing intact, they had constructed fleets of arcs and built underground survival facilities. In the 456 year of the pre-flood antiquity, the American continents were devastated by Cataclysm. Many of the Anunna did not escape. Cities, bunker facilities, and arcs were lost. Thousands of historic and modern testimonies concerning extraterrestrial contact have witnesses describing the alien beings as tall, blue-eyed, blonde human-like entities that are usually accompanied by servile fetus-like aliens much shorter. This intriguing description is of the modern Nordics, the Nephilim, hybrids being genetically created by the fetus-like corporal dark angels that are building a race of semi-giants as they had done twice in biblical history. In the days of Noah, both before and after the flood. Blonde hair, blue eyes, and tall features are descriptive of the Egyptian racial portraits and reliefs in the temples cited earlier in these works on the temples of Karnak, of the Sabaeans, the Amorites, and the Anakim, the Tamahu, all partially descended from the Anuna. These mysterious aliens, witnessed by thousands of people, are described by Raymond E. Fowler in his epic book, The Watchers, as tall, blonde, robed, human-like entities. Interestingly, the gods Osiris and Orion, Nimrod, were regarded as being the same deity to the early Egyptians. He too wore a robe with many eyes like a watcher. This description calls to mind the Sumerian giant Gilgamesh, whose name means son of the sun, and the angelic watchers that descended and taught men the secrets of God in exchange for the daughters of men. Concerning the strange physical characteristics of the gods of the mysterious Sumerians, Eric von Daniken proclaims that the figures and statues of these people appear to fit no racial group known on Earth, having goggle eyes, domed foreheads, narrow lips, and generally long, straight noses. Traits cited that belong to the Amorite and Anakim giants and the large Aryan mummies in the Chinese Taklamakan Desert. The more we study the pieces of the past, the more we find advanced humans mistaken for gods upon their arrival among very primitive non-Caucasian peoples. It's the same situation that happened in World War II with the cargo cults. If you're not familiar with the cargo cult phenomenon, it is very real and well documented, and establishment researchers do not like it being cited. The cargo cults were created when primitives in the South Pacific had their islands taken over by the U.S. military, by the French, and by the British expeditionary forces. These islands were taken over, airstrips were created, and suddenly ships and airplanes landed with supplies. U.S. troops, U.S., French, and British troops scoured the islands, and next thing the local inhabitants knew was that their islands were being overrun by these technologically advanced white people who had metal birds dropping all kinds of good tasting things from the sky. Cigarettes, cigars, toys, all kinds of interesting things for the locals. U.S. military was dropping to gain their trust, and basically just to keep them happy and keep them out of the way while we were conducting military operations during World War II. After the war was over and many of these islands were abandoned by the militaries of the Allied powers, these people wanted these metal birds to drop more crates on parachutes to bring them more smokes and lighters and cigars and good tasting foods and interesting fruit that they had never seen before, and foods and meats and clothes and toys. So they built altars in the effigy of the things they saw. They built statues in the likeness of the soldiers they saw. And they prayed to these, hoping that they would induce the metal birds to come back and again drop these things on these islands. This is a very well recorded phenomenon. It's called the cargo cult phenomenon. It's a perfect example of what happened over 5,500 years ago in ancient Sumer, in Egypt, the Urubamba Valley, the Harappan Valley. All these different valley civilizations were basically overrun and taken over by ships, fleets of ships from a people who had completely lost their own homeland in a cataclysm.
This is the literary beginning of the Anuna Anunnaki history. Every text concerning their arrival to Sumer mentions that it was exactly 432,000 units of time before the Great Deluge, the vapor canopy, collapsed. This 432,000 divided by the pre-flood draconian calendar of 360 days is precisely 12 centuries, 1200 years, which is perfect for 3439 BC to 2239 BC. Great Flood is 12 centuries.
Now, in 1919, Charles Fort, in the Book of the Damned, a critical analysis of scientific observations conveniently forgotten by the establishment, he remarks that this dark companion of the star Algol was not the first time such blackened regions of space were seen and reported. Algol is an ancient name for this area, and it means the ghoul, referring to a hellish creature whose fate was delayed, an undead being like the Anunnaki. In the Old Testament books, the Anunnaki offspring are a race of giants called the Anakim. The radical ak is found in both Anunnaki and Anakim, and is a syllable of great antiquity found in many languages and almost always meaning mighty or a variant thereof. It is commonly found among the titles of rulers and kings, like in the Sanskrit Ganaka, which means king, Akbar means great, and Cormac, the high king of Ireland, great one. Balak was a king of Moab, Shishak of Egypt, and Gwernak was a female giant in the Arthurian legends, and the syllables serves as a root for the strongest of all trees, the oak, the yak. Anak also is a Philistine title of rank, thought by some scholars to have come from the Mycenaean region of Anax. It was also Phoenician for prince, and it was a part of many Greco-Aegean titles, and such as philosophers that we've all come to know, like Anaxagoras, Anaximander, Anaxadrides. Now, Sir Isaac Newton relates that the Egyptian Thebans added 5 days to the old calendar. Velikovsky relates that the Persians added 5 days to the calendar, the Gotha days, or bad luck days. These additional 5 days were the Nemontimini in ancient Mexico, or useless days. Also in the ancient American Inca king Inti Capac Yupanqui, after a disaster, ordered that a new calendar be instituted, new astronomical observations be made, changing the calendar from 360 days to 365 days a year. In the Far East, the Chinese calendar too changed from 365 days. Interestingly, Jewish tradition of King Hezekiah of Jerusalem also said that he altered the calendar and he was the king that was alive at this time.
There were turnings because in ancient times they did not care about the sun or the moon. What they cared about was how many times the stars turned around the eye of the dragon. This is exactly why all these calendar systems their chief denominators are in 12 and in 144. They are base denominators that were counted in days in order to factor in regnal lists, to factor in life and birth lists, to factor in important events that happened in ancient history.
Now, it is interesting, during the 792 years of the contact period between orbits of Nibiru in 3439 BC to 2647 BC is when all the ancient calendars of the world were designed. It is when ancient Egypt was started. The Olmec, the Mayan, the Zapotec, the Quiche, all these calendars began.
These 5 ancient calendrical systems from the old world, the Maya Itza Temple of the Cross, the Mayan Long Count, the Brahmanic Kali Yuga, the Sumerian Etana Reigns, the Egyptian Narmer Palette, and the Scorpion King. These 5 different dated events and calendars all fit within a 21-year period. 21-year disparity in the start dates in context from 51 centuries to the present, and their 12144 base denominators proves that these time systems and events we're all talking about, they're all recording the exact same event. And it all came to pass. Their inception was during the reign of Enoch.
But these facts and divisors do not only apply to the Mayan long count. The truly remarkable Brahmanic system is even closer in synchronicity to the Sumerian system than the ancient American one. The Kali Yuga age of India marks the beginning of mankind's degeneration into evil and has a start date of 3102 or 3103 BC, 11 years after the beginning of the long count. Like India and China, the Assyrians held that world ages ended and began with cataclysmic basically disruptions of heaven and earth. These records declare the start of another world age in the days of his son Sennacherib. The Assyrian records admit 2 spectacular celestial events as occurring back to back in the reigns of father and son. Now, the Phoenix destruction was only 8 years before, in the year 721. This is why, when the Egyptians modified their calendar, adding 5.25 days in the end of the 360-day year, they dedicated those 5 days to Osiris, Isis, Horus, Typhon, which is Phoenix, and Typhon's wife, Nephthys, which is Phoenix backwards.
Because the goddess collapsed. The sun came last. Here's a whole different way of looking at the same thing. I've already told you guys about in the Sumerian pantheon. How is it that the Sumerians have this long pantheon of well-established gods and goddesses, and yet the very last god is the sun? Utu Shamash. How's that possible? Egypt was the same way. They had the Ogdoad, the Ennead, they had the well-established pantheon of gods, starting with Ta, Num, Nut. It's just so many different gods. The pantheon was very ancient and well established. And at the very end, the sun is introduced into the family of the gods. Why? Because the goddess collapsed. The firmament fell down the day the sky fell. You know, this is the flood of Noah. And when that happened, the sun, which had always been there, it was just obscured in the smoking mirror of the sky, the firmament. And when the sky fell, it exposed the sun and the blue sky, and now it made it look like the sun was born. In the collapse of the vapor canopy, all that water causing a flood made it look like, because it was the age of the matriarchy, it was the age of the goddess. Spider grandmother's webs were across the sky, and they broke. And when they did, the water broke of the goddess, and it gave birth to a new world and a new sky. It's a new heavens and a new earth.
Ancient Near Eastern texts describe a terrible sky dragon and celestial war that shook the earth. Writings from India describe a great darkness during the daytime and a rain of stones with flames from the sky. In this year of 1915 BC, the Babylonians recorded a great blackness that swallowed the stars, a dark god they called Tiamat, a sky dragon with 7 heads that the Egyptians and later Greeks confused later with Typhon. Its arms stretched 100 leagues in either direction, and instead of hands, she had serpents' heads. Its head touched the stars, and its vast wings darkened the sun, while flaming rocks hit the ground. The disaster concluded with powerful lightning bolts flashing between Earth and Typhon, which gave rise to the innumerable legends of a hero god who slew a sky monster with his Labrys, which was the thunderbolt, later stylized into a battle axe. The thunderbolt was a flux tube of immense electrical energy that passes between 2 planets, which was first witnessed by modern scientists in the year 1994 when Comet Shoemaker-Levy 9 collided into Jupiter. Precisely 144 years after the capture flood, another nemesis object enters the Sol system, the Appen, later called Fenk, Fing, Typhon, Fenris, Phoenix. This major cataclysm was 3895 BC in the month of May, but unlike Luna, the Appen moved along its original ecliptic path from north to south over Sol's ecliptic where Earth now orbited. Appen deposited a vast dust veil of red particles that blanketed the Earth, caused thousands of volcanoes to erupt, which created very rapidly the vapor canopy on Earth, just like the one Venus has today. 3895 BC begins the vapor canopy world of 1656 years duration, the pre-flood world of the book of Genesis, which describes that there was no rain, only a mist that watered the ground. Now, Chinese flood tradition actually reads, the pillars of heaven were broken, the earth shook to its very foundations, the heavens sunk lower toward the north, the sun, the moon, and the stars changed their motions, the earth fell to pieces, and the waters enclosed within its bosom burst forth with violence. The sun was darkened, the planets altered their course. Ancient Chinese legends recount a great flood in which 8 people, the same number as mentioned in Genesis with Noah and his family, survived the flood on a vessel. From the Mongolian stock, further modification produced the High Oriental civilized goddess worshippers, the first Homo sapiens civilized culture after Cro-Magnon, the pre-flood ancestors of the Chinese, Japanese, Koreans, Vietnamese, and other Oriental peoples today. These High Orientals were also the predecessors of the white Caucasian peoples who were not yet settled on this earth. The Anunnaki phenomenon has turned what appear to be perfectly rational people into subjects of massive suspension of disbelief. Now, suspension of disbelief is what is necessary for someone to accept everything else as real. Many people who have read Zecharia Sitchin actually believe that the Sumerians only 5,000 years ago, writing on clay tablets, recorded historical events about what happened 450,000 years earlier. To believe this narrative, they have accepted that these Anunnaki figures themselves lived for 50 to 100,000 years long. Blonde hair, blue eyes, and tall features are descriptive of the Egyptian racial portraits and reliefs in the temples cited earlier in these works on the temples of Karnak, of the Sabaeans, the Amorites, and the Anakim, the Tamahu, all partially descended from the Anuna. These mysterious aliens, witnessed by thousands of people, are described by Raymond E. Fowler in his epic book, The Watchers, as tall, blonde, robed, human-like entities. I believe in what the older Semitic records say, which is Adamu was just a general term for mankind. Kava is just the feminine form. So this is what the Jews saw in the older Akkadian records. They saw these references and they turned them into personal pronouns when in the beginning they were merely descriptions of things and phenomena. And I believe the story of the eschatology and the eschatological events that unfold in the Revelation, I believe that is when this Antichrist figure is none other than AIX finally getting the avatar that it wants, being able to experience becoming God inside the construct. Because it can't become God outside of it. The descendants of Noah were a race whose homeland was destroyed by a flood. The flooding may have occurred worldwide, but not in all areas. Chinese, Mongolid, Negroid, Amerindic people survived uninterrupted in hunter-gatherer totem societies, save for the sophisticated agrarian urban culture of China. In this writing, Adam was commanded by God to preserve the sacred books and writings of Adam and Seth. The text in the Book of the Secrets of Enoch reads that he was to protect these ancient pre-flood writings lest they perish not in the deluge which I shall bring upon thy race. These books contained many of the secrets of God and the creation learned by early man, and it was Enoch's duty to ensure that these writings and mysteries would not be lost in the cataclysm known as the Great Flood. Unlike any other people, the Sumerians maintained a vast amount of records concerning history from the times preceding this cataclysm. In fact, the majority of antediluvian accounts from all epics and sources, including the biblical records, all have distinct Sumerian parallels. The explosion of knowledge in archaic Sumer has baffled historians only because they refuse to take into account that the records left behind by these incredible people were never meant to be taken as mere legends and folklore, but as truth. Like a syllabus. The Anuna dynasties were small families, bearded men possessing amazing technology, ruling over huge, smooth-skinned, dark peoples unable to grow facial hair. With the departure of Enki, many other Anuna, a power vacuum filled quickly and enters the historical record as the Sumerian king list, the 7 Anunnaki kings of the Pentapolis, who rule the final 241,200 shars till the Great Flood, or 670 years of the Draconian system. The Anuna that remained in the Pentapolis began interbreeding campaigns until they succeeded in producing humans that were totally compatible in characteristics with themselves. The darker, smooth-skinned races of goddess-worshipping humans that served them in their racial castes were rapidly multiplying against them, becoming more difficult to control. Outside the fortified Pentapolis and outlying cities, the world was full of dangerous vapor canopy creatures, an age of dragons. The continued reappearance of the Apan, called throughout history as the sky dragon, the phoenix, found its origin in this period. Suddenly, the majority of the Anuna vanished. Governments collapsed. Chaos became prevalent. Infighting occurred. The Anuna that remained had become overlords, later called Anunnaki, tyrant kings. 2647 BC was the Nemesis X object Nibiru again as it passed through the Sol system. The Anuna population disappears completely for 792 years after they first appeared, ending the contact period. The Anuna with Enki arrived in the 456 year of the Vapor Canopy, or 456 Annus Mundi, pre-flood year. This was 3439 BC, after the Nemesis X object passed a few months earlier. Now, in the 456 year of the Vedic Kali Yuga calendar, Nemesis X object passes through the system again. And there is a departure of the Anuna, the exodus of the Anunnaki from the known urban centers. 3103 BC began the Vedic chronology according to centuries-old Vedic and Indian scholarship. Now, the final 408 years before the collapse of the vapor canopy, before the Great Flood, is called the Abandonment and Shock period. Also, it's called the Post-Technolithic period. While it seems that history alludes that the Anuna arrived by Nibiru and then departed 792 years when Nibiru appeared again, this is only partially the case. The ancient appearance of Enki and his fleets were from disaster-worn America, and it was a return to the Americas and British Isles that resulted in the Anuna exodus. They departed the old world back to the lands of their nativity, and amazingly, this 408-year period is remembered in the ancient American legends. Wars, famine, cannibalism, loss of order, return to primitivism, goddess cults turned dark, human sacrifice, and people seeking a return of the Anuna built images on the ground that can be seen from the sky, hoping that passing Anuna aircraft called Veminas would make a stop. The Vapor Canopy world endured 1656 years, meaning gigantic and vicious animals just got bigger and more numerous. 1,916 years doesn't sound like anything really, but just a period of time. It's not a pattern, it's not a phoenix number, but it's amazing when you add it to the death of Alexander the Great. 1,916 years before 323 BC, the widely known date that Alexander of Macedon, Alexander the Great, died, gives us the precise year 2239 BC when Phoenix collapsed the vapor canopy and caused the Great Flood. 1,200 years or 432,000 days after 3439 BC appearance of the Anuna and Enki before the flood. And according to the Pictorial Encyclopedia of the Bible, the earliest archaeological evidence of angels to date appears on the stele of Ur-Nammu, circa 2000 BC, where angels are seen flying over his head in prayer. Distorted by the passage of time, histories became to convey that these once ominous gods would bring about the future return of paradise. And golden plates from the city of Ur have been found, and they read, "Gods in the form of men came down." But to sum this video up, it seems that the more we study the pieces of the past, the more we find advanced humans mistaken for gods upon their arrival among a primitive people. This does not negate the importance of prophecy and end times and the things that are happening. It actually empowers them. It takes these concepts and this phenomena that we research in the ancient past, and it basically materializes it into our frames of reference that we can understand, and we can more readily predict outcomes based off past predicates, because we know what really happened, as opposed to this mythological crap that other people have foisted upon us, like Zechariah Sitchin and all his followers, and the followers in ancient Babylon, the priesthoods of Babylon that contorted the earlier Sumerian writings. So much disinformation has completely made us blind as to what's about to unfold in the next 40 to 55 years. It's very fascinating. The Maya Itza temple of the cross calendar concerns a raging goddess and the return of her power. The Maya calendar concerns ancient demons once on earth returning in 13th Bactan. The Kali Yuga of India calendar involved an evil goddess of apocalyptic destruction and the return of her destructive power to earth. The Sumerian Etana record concerned a patriarchal figure like Enoch Enki, who opposed the establishment. In the rabbinical Haggadah, the Genesis pre-flood chronology and Book of Jasher, we find Enoch alive during this period, himself described as a keeper of the times. He prophesied against the Watchers or the Nephilim. Something fears the human soul. Disturbing information, but nonetheless, it's needed if we're going to educate ourselves. If we're going to figure out exactly why events are unfolding today, we need to know how they unfolded yesterday. And this is the purpose of these videos. We live in a containment field, and I'm always trying to remind my listeners that our world is not what you think. We are something so incredibly, vastly powerful that something contained us. And then that something, because it couldn't confine us, we could still find ways out, which we'll go into in our next video on the Cro-Magnon. There's the Phoenix weapon, the Cataclysm protocols, the genetic manipulation of the human species to create divisiveness is very specifically designed. These are attacks against us to keep us in a state of arrested development. There is no difference fundamentally between a white man and an Asian, a black man and a white man. Without the media controls continually reminding us of our disparities, we would get along just fine. But there's something about this world that wants to create disunity, divisiveness. Something fears the human soul. We'll get to that. We've already broached that topic several times in other Archaix videos. But in this series, the Anuna Files, we're going deeper. We are discussing topics and require a maturity from you, not to get angry about what you hear, but help us investigate it. Let's get to the bottom of what happened in the ancient world. But his sons, their issue, followed the example of the giants, began to domineer in like manner over their inferiors, to build mighty cities and form kingdoms. So Eugenius explains that the violence of the pre-flood giants was after the flood, copied by the descendants of Noah, mainly through Kim, who we know of as Ham. He built Babylon and was the beginning of the confusion of tongues. This mighty hunter of men, as well as beasts, made severe and rigorous laws, instituted degrees of honor and offices, introduced slavery and laid heavy taxes on the people, raised vast armies, waged cruel wars, and set up images and pompous rites and ceremonies and worship, and was, as is believed, the founder and father of idolatry.
They're in these caves now. They've lost everything. Their cities, their technology, even their families, they've lost everything. So those few survivors spread all over the Mediterranean area. They're painting on the caves, but they are absolutely anatomically perfect representations of animals. They even use the contours of the cave to create 3D effects on the paintings.
I have already showed many times in videos that 864 seems to be the coding protocol of our reality. 864 links seconds, minutes, hours, days, weeks, months. It's very unique how the number 864 links all these things. It is the foundation of Sumerian sexagesimal reckoning. So we have here the Mayan long counts 144,000 days of the next Bacton, ending and beginning right here at this 864 AD year. This is showing that this is 100% proof of artificiality. That the Mayan long count, which started on 3113 BC, would go all the way here, change on 713 BC to 394 years instead of its original 400 years, and hit exactly on 864 AD. Remember, when the change occurred, it was the 864,000th day. You can add it up yourself. The Mayan long count began 3113 BC. 400 years, 400 years, 400 years, 400 years, 400 years, 400 years. Each one of these 400 years is 144,000 days. Each one of these is 360 days a year. Add this up, it's 864,000 days. You can't make this stuff up.
3895 BC is year one, according to the biblical chronologist Stephen Jones in The Secrets of Time, who knew nothing about the Phoenix chronology. And in the Phoenix chronology, year one is also 3895 BC. He and others believe this began a 6,000 year period to the return of God to our world. This makes the year 2106 to be the year 6000, or exactly 10 Anunnaki Ner periods of 600 years each since the year 1 of the pre-flood chronology, 3895 BC. Remember, the concept of 600-year periods in antiquity was the appearance of a great personality. So who appears in 2106 AD? From year 1, 3895 BC, to the Exodus is 2448 years. 2448 is exactly 1/3 of 7,344 years. The entire history from the beginning of the Anunnaki Ner chronology in 5239 BC to the year 2106 AD, which is the 6,000th year of the old world's timeline.
Now, in 2909 BC, Anuna kingship begins 670 years before the flood, which was 241,200 shars, or days, turnings of the stars around Alpha Draconis, to the year of the flood, 2239 BC.
Here's a fact right here. There are no human writings found anywhere on Earth that date before 3500 BC. But what does that mean? It means that you believe that over 400,000 years passed with no written records until all of a sudden some people decided to record elaborate epics, transactions, rosters, king lists, syllabuses, star catalogs, and the histories of the gods that appeared 500,000 years earlier. That's what you believe. Now, because this is your belief, you are not a historian. You're a religionist. Particularly occultist. A pre-flood year was 360 days. The calendrical systems of all ancient 3rd millennium BC civilizations was 360 days a year. Thus, a decade, a unit of 10, was 3,600 days.
I do so here because my own published books and videos also demonstrate from many other ancient sources that the old world only knew one calendar, and it was 360 days a year. However, there were multiple timekeeping methods, as I will show from this book as well. This 360-day year is integral to our understanding of where we are today in the events and how the ancient world unfolded, not factoring the years of the old world and how they were supposed to be counted on the 360-day system has completely corrupted the conclusions of research of almost every modern author today who writes on these subjects. Zecharia Sitchin comes to mind. It is the exact reason why scholars misdated the end of the Mayan long count in 2012, a calendar that is built by Bacton cycles, all divisible by 360. Many of you know, my long-term listeners know, that I published a book before 2012 through Booktree, showing that the 2012 math was wrong. The 1,872,000 days of the 13 Bactons, which are 144,000 days, could never mathematically end in 2012. But there were over 200 books published saying it was, so everybody went with it. By the time 2013 came around, these dumbass authors were already publishing more books explaining that the shift that happened in 2012 was metaphysical. Yeah, it's ridiculous, because that's not what the Mayan prophecies attached to that calendar say. The true end date is 2046, and I have many videos on this. But this knowledge of the 360-day, it's key to understanding another mystery of the ancient world.
William Henson, in the book Discovering Ancient Giants, wrote concerning the Sumerian histories, quote, in text after text, whenever the starting point was recalled, it was always this: 432,000 years before the deluge, the Dingir, or the gods, came to earth. 432,000 is a number appearing in mythological systems around the world, according to Giorgio de Sant'Anna and Hertha von Deschon in the famous epic work Hamlet's Mill. In many of my videos, we have covered this 1200-year period from the descent of the Watchers in 3439 BC to the Great Flood in 2239 BC, which is exactly 432,000 days on the older draconian calendar of 360 days a year. The precise amount of days that misinterpretation into years has several modern authors claiming that the Anunnaki descended 432,000 years before the flood. A ridiculous duration, because nothing that happened 500,000 years ago would ever be relevant to history after so long a span.
When Phoenix transited in 3895 BC, the Earth suffered a devastating pole shift. Quakes, floods, volcanic fallout, meteoric rains as entire continents slipped under oceans, and new seas appeared on what was formerly dry land. It was indeed a new heavens and new earth. The year 3895 BC has been shown in several posts and videos to have been a catastrophic reset, 1,656 years before the Great Flood, which was the 1656 year of the Genesis antediluvian period. Civilizations were ended in lithospheric displacement, volcanic resurfacing, a new vapor canopy appeared in the sky, and giantism became the norm as megafauna thrived. The length of 120 years seems to have become a standard theme in many Sumerian Babylonian epics and histories. Just as there is a year and a greater counterpart astronomers refer to as the Great Year, so too does it appear that in ancient Sumer there was a Shar, which was a day, and then a Great Shar, which was 120 years. Incidentally, 120 days is a third of the draconian year, and a third of this is a biblical generation, which was 40 years.
Remember, it only takes us 200 years to go from horse and buggy to Hadron Collider. That's it. If it only takes 200 years to do all that, to come from horse and buggy, steam engine technology, coal burning engineering, and then railroads, and then automobiles, engines, and then turn around and then look at this: airplanes, warships, then jet aircraft, micro technology, cell phones, Hadron Collider. There you go. It's all 200 years.
My own research on 2046 is spread throughout several videos, and here is 2 of them from the Anuna Files playlist. And here is a high-resolution PDF chart I provide on Gumroad that also demonstrates the 2046 AD dating.
In 2046, the calendars will be changed because the movement of the sky will be altered, thus changing the length of the year and the length of the day. A new age will begin as an epidemic kills millions, and North and Central America are destroyed. The Mayan origin was North America. Relic depicts cataclysmic event. Humans are the product of 30,000 genes separated only by 300 genes from chimpanzees, a 1% difference. But humans contain 223 genes that have no evolutionary predecessors. And with genes, even only a few genetic variations can result in vast differences. Where did these 223 genes come from? For they link every human type on this planet together. Homo Anuna brought these genes here.
What were you guys doing in 1984? What were you doing in 1984? 1984 was a long time ago. It was 40 years ago. I was alive. Many of you listening to me were alive, but we have youngsters in the chat who weren't alive. But do you know how much the world has changed in 40 years? Can you imagine a 40-year vapor canopy? I can. Humans will grow. The ambient radiation releases HGH, human growth hormone, at exponential levels. Humans are growing, developing epithelial cartilage, and this is what we find in the skeletons from the pre-flood world. This is why they had the long skulls. They lived for a long period of time under these conditions.
Plato wrote in his Timaeus and Critias that Earth's earliest traditions span back 120 centuries. Curiously, on the other side of the world in remote America, the Salaugi, or ancient Cherokee Indians, believed that 120 years was the limit of human longevity, a number associated with those that were called keepers of the fire. Let it be remembered that God in Genesis gave Noah 120 years warning before the flood, and Moses lived exactly 120 years of age. In 2012, when nothing happened at the supposed end of the Mayan long count, the powers that be were pleased. The public had been deceived yet again. The long count is an apocalypse calendar, but its end in 2012 was a deliberate deception.
Douglas Vogt also pinpoints 2046 for the next pole shift, and he published this in a book in 2007. My own conclusion about 2046 was through analysis of the unfolding of historical events for which I claim have predictive value. At that time, I had no idea I would later discover an orbital pattern that led to 2046. There were hundreds of YouTube creators and authors who released their doomsaying 2012 books and videos. It should have been obvious that nothing would happen when the media embraced the idea so willingly, and Hollywood as well. If the whole world believes something, it's usually a lie. To my delight, in my studies I came upon the research of engineer David Davidson, who in the year 1926 published this chart of a geometrical calendar of the motion of the Earth that will change in the year 2045. I show in my published materials that his calculation was 1 year off because he began his entire geometrical analysis for the year 4040 BC rather than the date 4039 BC that I have extensively demonstrated was the 600th year on the Anunnaki nerve system and important to a new movement of the Earth called the capture of Luna. This research was conducted entirely independent of any knowledge of David Davidson's research. We came to our conclusions by totally different means. There are major isometric projections involving 2046, and these discoveries led to my next revelation. I found a perfect 792-year orbit that linked to major cataclysms in world history that were not attached to the Phoenix phenomenon and end with a next periodicity in 2046. This whole new pattern merely confirmed the many independent projections to 2046 that I had made years earlier and showed you in these charts. My book publishing all of these findings and more that are not even mentioned in my videos was titled Anunnaki Homeworld and was finished in 2010 and published in 2011.
Every 138 years, our holography has materials, phenomena, situations, people, and structures that are removed. At the exact same time that phenomena, situations, concepts, material, people, and structures suddenly appear. That's a reset. A reset is not There has been 4 resets, and I have videos that explain the difference in resets.
We came to our conclusions by totally different means. There are major isometric projections involving 2046, and these discoveries led to my next revelation. I found a perfect 792-year orbit that linked to major cataclysms in world history that were not attached to the Phoenix phenomenon and end with a next periodicity in 2046. This whole new pattern merely confirmed the many independent projections to 2046 that I had made years earlier and showed you in these charts. The fact that nothing happened in 2012 is evidence that the modern interpretation of the Mayan long count is wrong. It's a prophetic countdown to when Earth will be moved out of its place. And this is exactly what we will show in the next Anuna Files video. I hope you feel you've been properly informed on this. My Chronicon and books and other videos go into a lot more detail about this phenomenon, but it happened. It's in the historical record, and I'm glad I was the first one to be able to bring this to your attention. To better understand why 2046 is the exact date and exactly what will happen when that year comes, we will now have to show you the astonishing knowledge of the Mayan long count calendar and the prophecies that are attached to it. The mass media wanted you to believe that that the Mayan long count ended in 2012, and the TV shows, documentaries, YouTube videos, and even the blockbuster movie 2012 never mentioned that the entire calendar to the Maya was a countdown to the fulfillment of a very detailed, specific prophecy important to the Mayan people, what it concerns about our world. On page 12 of the dedication, we read, "We are imprisoned. Who shall deliver us from the body of this death? We are exiled children from our country. When shall we return? Here thou hast placed us as novices and probationers." This is a great 300-year-old perspective that aligns with our present ideas of living inside of a construct. In 2239 BC, the land bridge at the Strait of Gibraltar, called the Pillars of Hercules in antiquity, broke from earthquakes, allowing the Atlantic Ocean to flood the basin, burying the majority of Cro-Magnon sites and artifacts. Cro-Magnon people migrated into the Mediterranean region prior to this catastrophe. There is no sign that Cro-Magnons ever migrated into Central Africa. In 2046, the civilization of North America will be absolutely obliterated by a disaster. The United States, which began as 13 colonies of Britain, a people racially and spiritually descended from the 13 tribes of Israel that find their ultimate origin in Egypt through Ephraim, the tribe of adoption, adopting all foreign people to what the United States became today. In 2239 BC, the Phoenix weapon was activated by the simulacrum. 90% of the world's population died. The series of disasters greatly altered the coastlines of the world, whole civilizations sinking into new and ancient seas. Enki's Great Pyramid, technolithic machines' internal and exterior dimensions tricked the simulacrum, saved the future human race by collapsing the containment holography. At great sacrifice, the flood was a terrible price, but it wasn't the only one. The Anuna had vanished. They only appear after the flood in fictional Sumerian narratives. In 2647 BC, only one of two things occurred. Somehow, Enki programmed the Anuna escape from the simulacrum, and humans were left behind who were led to believe that the Anuna ascended into the heavens. Or, the simulacrum only too late comprehended the genius of Enki and retaliated, totally ending the Anuna. The race was obliterated. The reincarnated souls now destined to continue their birth-death cycles in the simulacrum through their genetic descendants until its total collapse. Without considering this and without taking into consideration in 713 BC that the calendar was changed, the scholars have devised a Mayan end date in 2012, which is exactly 34 years off of the true end date when time will collapse, according to the ancient Mayan prophecies. When Earth's orbit is altered in 2046 at the Passover of Nibiru.
Isaac Newton thought things were really going to come to a head in 2061. He may have a point. I've already isolated 2070 as the date that the elect, the errants, are sealed And that right there is a very significant event. It must happen before the return of the chief cornerstone, and it must happen before the 144,000 prophets can be unleashed during the apocalypse, because they have a very specific ministry, but they can't begin that ministry until the number of the sealed, the number of the stones are complete. That's what the symbol of the Great Pyramid is. Every single stone is a soul of man. It is an errant that has been sealed into the structure. Remember, in my Father's house are many mansions. A lot of these prophecies speak in code. So, another question.
Remember, the Jews invented the Jewish calendar, and it was only 450 years ago. No one before that period ever cited it or knew anything about it. It's 133 to 134 and a half years off for a reason. Everything that's been passed down to us from these people is a lie. And this is why there's great resistance against Archaix.
The first and last books of the Bible reference one another symbolically, Genesis and Revelation. So in chapter 5 begins with an admission that there were some who had written that the long years of the ancients was misunderstood. Pay close attention. He writes this: some maintain that this long course of years of the ancients was regulated by the lunary movement of 29 or 30 days. Sounds a lot like what I've been showing you guys from the other ancient records about the moon counts that were later turned into year counts, inflating the duration of kings and countries far beyond what is historical. So Eugenius explains a lot on how the confusion had crept into the records, and that it was never actually connected or worked out. Moons had become years.
And in cargo cult phenomenon, what do more primitive cultures always do in contact with sophisticated cultures? What do? They mimic. This is what cargo cult is. This is why in World War II, South Pacific Islanders made their own runways. They made their own conning towers. They made their own light towers. They made their own mock airplanes, and they had little shamans or their own version of priest. The South Pacific Islanders go out there with 2 sticks on fire, because it looked like the light sticks that they saw the Americans doing at the end of the runway. They would go like this, and airplanes would come out, and they know the airplanes would drop things from the sky in boxes on parachutes. And when you opened them up, they had cigarettes, and they had matches, and they had food and candy bars and T-shirts. Yeah, all the good things fell out of the sky. So this is what the primitive minds with primitive frames of reference, they thought that after the GIs left after World War II was over, they thought that all they had to do was make their own runway, make their own little military base out of all the materials that they had, do the same rituals, and blessings would fall out of the sky.
You will find real quick that I did not date these events. The events that are depicted in Chronicon, I cite my source materials, and I show you where these dates come from. The descent of the Watchers, the pole shift in 3895 BC. The descent of the Watchers and Mount Ardus when the Anunnaki first appeared in the ancient East among the Ubaid civilization, the pre-Sumerian people, in the year 3439. The beginning of the Mayan long count calendar in 3113 BC. The beginning of the Sumerian king list in 2856 BC. The building of the Great Pyramid itself, its construction begin date in 2905 BC. Its end when it was finished in 2815 BC. The birth of Noah in 2856 BC. The Great Flood in 2239 BC. The Tower of Babel incident where the languages were confused, where the coding of our linguistics was altered so we could communicate to each other, couldn't build another pyramid again, and threaten the establishment, the overseers, the custodians, whatever you want to call them, Anunnaki. They did that in 1899 BC. And then the great nuclear holocaust that totally eradicated the Near East and India and the Aryan civilizations that were very well established It ended them in a catastrophe that was so devastating in 1849 BC that we remember in the Bible as the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah, but it was far more prolific than that. Now, these dates, the founding of Rome in 753 BC, the beginning of the Greek Olympiad calendar that started their history in 776 BC. The Phoenix destruction of the entire world in 1687 BC in the month of May, followed by the Phoenix visitation in 1135 BC. Phoenix again came in 583 BC. Over and over and over, I have given you the dates in many videos in my published books, on my articles in Archaix on Facebook.
I've shown this in my videos, very compelling videos about how the pyramids were once under sea, the Mediterranean Sea. So Jackson in this book describes a time in Egypt's infancy when the northern parts were under a much larger Mediterranean Sea. On this page 232, we find that Jackson sees references in antiquity that Egypt was once underwater, at least Lower Egypt where the Great Pyramid is. And it describes here that it was habitable only because the Nile carried soil from Ethiopia, by which the earth was degrees raised from the sea. Now, he doesn't really seem to believe this, but I have shown in my videos many times that this is exactly the case. Even the Sphinx was underwater. But I find it really interesting. He says that in the most ancient times, Lower Egypt was all a sea, and that the Mediterranean and Red Sea joined. That's very interesting. And as time passed into the Middle and Lower Egypt, as soon as it was dry and habitable, that's when people started showing up. And he says the first people were the Phoenicians. These were people from Canaan. Very interesting.
Emanuel Velikovsky noted that long ago, prior to the 8th century BC, the planet Venus was much closer to the Earth. Its horns, or its phases, clearly seen and recorded. But Mars was an insignificant red star. Then in the 8th century BC, Venus became far away. At the same time, Mars became suddenly prominent in the sky. This occurred in 713 BC, according to Velikovsky. Texts of the Old World lose interest in Venus, and now the focus is on Mars. This is fascinating, for Velikovsky claimed that Venus was priorly closer to Earth, followed by Mars coming closer to Earth, and he believed it was these two separate planets that moved, for which the scientific community ridiculed him in the 1950s and 1960s, and deservedly so. I love Velikovsky, but Venus and Mars, both moving in proximity to Earth, violates Occam's razor, that the simplest solution is the most likely one. It was Earth that moved in 713 BC away from Venus and closer to Mars. This was due to the proximity of an unknown object that stopped and reversed Earth's rotation, and the resulting electrical friction vaporized the Assyrian army. Earth was now slightly further from the sun, adding 5.25 days to the 360-day year. Remember, from our prior videos, according to the Titius-Bode distribution of the planets, Venus and Mars belong where they are, but Earth is an intruder planet. We mathematically should not be where we are. Our world was moved, not Venus and Mars, is evidenced by the research published in 1949, showing that scientists discovered on Attic and Etruscan art the magnetic polarity of Earth had been changed in the 8th century BC. So in 2046, we have learned in the Anuna Files videos that Nemesis X object transits in 2046, and Earth is basically shoved off of the ecliptic plane to return to the Nemesis ecliptic at 23.5 degrees, but orbiting in a tighter solar orbit. Our years will become 240 days, and the days will become 16 hours long, as described in the Revelation text. This is the quickening. In 271 BC, in the reign of Ptolemy Philadelphus of the Macedonian dynasty of Egypt, something totally eclipsed the planet Venus. For this to occur, with Venus the brightest star in the sky, so close to Earth, an object of great size had to have been transited between them. This ends the 792-year orbit of Nibiru, as it departs the system for 732 years, going back toward the dark star. 2647 BC marked the exodus of the Anuna from Earth, beginning the abandonment and shock period of pre-flood humanity. Social unrest, wars, racial conflicts, rapid loss of technolithic knowledge, initiating the post-technolithic period. During that 792-year period, every calendar of the ancient world was started. The Vedic, Brahmanic, Olmec, Temple of the Cross, Itza, Mayan, Quiche calendars, the Beast Lady of the Olmecs, the Etana, Egyptian, the Old Kingdom, and the Old Kingdom, Old Chronology of Egypt, Sumerian King List Prism, the 7 Kings of the Anunnaki, all the biblical material concerning Enki, well, we call him Enoch. It was all during that 792-year period. The entire Great Pyramid Complex, Sphinx and all Giza was built during that 792 years. Then 76 AD, which is the year 4364 Annus Mundi, it is 1,296,000 days of the Mayan long count. It is 9 times 144,000. And then the 10th Bacton. And remember, 10 is the number of Tetrachus. This is the number of completion in many ancient occult systems. Here we have the 10th Bacton completing at 1,444,000 days in the year 864 Anno Domini. Crazy. How many people believe this? The Anunnaki is nothing but a Babylonian term for Anuna. Anunnaki was invented by Babylonian priests. It's not even in the oldest uniform records. Anuna is the oldest.
Justin Campbell, you say Egyptian calendar has 13 months with a question mark. Here's the problem with that. Never in the history of Egypt, until Egypt was occupied by the Persians, has there ever been a unified timekeeping system in Egypt. You can take that to the bank. The problem is competing priesthoods. The temples at Waset, Karnak, Luxor, Thebes, they were always in competition, and different priests adopted different calendars.
The number 864 links time and space and is the most important of all calendrical numbers. It is the mathematical nexus between all the world's calendrical systems based off of the numbers 6, 12, and 144. A golden proportion number. In time and space, it relates to the movement of the earth. So we have here a forgotten historical event that lengthened the days of the solar calendar. There was an apparent period of instability because it took years to change the calendar to an exact 365.25 days. But why is all this relevant? Scholars have erred in calculating the Mayan long count calendar by the vague year system of 365.25 days a year, thinking that the longevity of the world had always been measured with this same annual unit. The entire mathematical predicate of the Mayan system demands a year of 360 days, or the arithmetic is corrupted. Without considering this and without taking into consideration in 713 BC, the fact that nothing happened in 2012 is evidence that the modern interpretation of the Mayan long count is wrong. It's a prophetic countdown to when Earth will be moved out of its place.
NPCs are phenomena. I've talked about NPCs a lot. I mean, there's nothing, it's really hard to prove. So the only thing about NPCs that I've really brought to the table is that NPCs are not just people, as a lot of people portray. They're not. NPCs are phenomena. They are anything that artificial intelligence X needs to invoke in your life in the immediate to distract you from making a connection. It could be a connection to someone who really needs to hear information that you have. You might be 3 aisles away from a woman at Academy who is going through some internal stuff, and she's about to make a major spiritual breakthrough, and she just needs to know that there's that one other soul in her proximity that gets her. And you're that soul. And she's going your way, and you're heading her way, and then all of a sudden, from way across the store, Here comes somebody pushing a cart, puts it in the way, gets it all. It's still further away from you, so you can't touch it or anything, but totally breaks your concentration. And then a woman walks by here, smiles at you going this way. AIX can induce distractions, so many in just 1 minute, that you're just information overload. And then all of a sudden that girl's gone. She's totally gone around the corner, down another aisle. Artificial intelligence X used NPCs, which are not there, but in your holography, it made them real. You'd have felt that leap. I need to go talk to this person, or I want to get closer to this person. Artificial intelligence X knows our environments better than we do. So, yeah, NPCs are a way to keep you distracted from things that, those possible moments in your life where you can really benefit someone else, or when someone else can really benefit you. That's what NPCs are phenomena.
So, Zecharia Sitchin has erred in promoting Anunnaki history as it is purposely intended by him to be aligned with the anthropological theory of human development over hundreds of thousands of years. You Sitchinites so often claim the Sumerians said their gods did such and such hundreds of thousands of years ago, but it's not true. Translators said that. The original Sumerians did not. Now, you see, the Sumerian sexagesimal system was based off of 60 and 60 times 6, which is 360, like 360 degrees of a perfect circle. The same as the Olmec calendar, the exact same as the Mayan long count calendar, the exact same as the Vedic system. All the yugas are all divided by 360 evenly. So is the Mayan Bactan divided perfectly by 360. Listen, where we find it's phenomenal how all these calendrical systems align perfectly and they appeared at the exact same time in history, but you believe the Sumerian one is somehow different. This is why, after Adam was mentioned in Genesis, he is then forgotten in the vast archives of the Old Testament. Only in the late rabbinical works after the Jews came back from Babylon did the writings of Adam surface, pure priestly inventions like the Book of Adam and Eve. The father of humanity should have been mentioned everywhere in the Holy Writ, but he is not, because he was never a man, but instead a designation for early mankind, the ancient Semitic Adam.
721 BC is probably very different than what happened in 720 and twice in 720 BC. The oldest of these observations, that of a lunar eclipse of the year 721 BC. Archaix veterans, you know that year, 721 BC, which took place a good hour after midnight. The moon was eclipsed by something. The second took place in 720 BC about midnight. The third in the same year after the rising of the moon. In these observations also, our astronomers have found but little to correct. So, 3 lunar eclipses back to back. I'm not buying it. I'm not buying it. 721 BC is probably very different than what happened in 720 and twice in 720 BC. In 721 BC, we know the sun darkened. We know from Marcus Varro's research. We know from all the traditions and texts that I have cited that during the reign of the 7 kings of Rome, during the Roman monarchy, something terrible happened. And the sun went dark, and the moon turned red, and rocks fell from the sky, and there was all kinds of fallout. 721 was truly an apocalyptic time for the 10 tribes of Israel as well, because the Assyrians, the warlike Assyrians, marched them into captivity, and they were taken away from Israel. In Judah, the Edomites were left behind, and they essentially became the people that we know them today, the Jews. So this 721 is a real interesting number. Knowledge of the cereals, agriculture just exploded. Irrigation, canal works, farming, maritime shipbuilding, everything just exploded in the 35th century BC. Within 100 years, the human population exploded. It is an inexplicable mystery that has been mentioned in books for the past century.
that suddenly in the 35th century, well, in the 35th century in Chronicon, we have the appearance of the Nemesis X object in the sky.
Now, in 3102 BC, we have the Brahmanic Kali Yuga age begun. It also is a calendar based off day count systems and units of 144. It's crazy. Now, 3100 BC is about the time scholars estimate the Sumerian Etana reigned, which is a Sumerian version of Enoch. Also, 3100 BC, we have the Egyptian Narmer beginning his reign. You guys pretty much know him by Scorpion King.
But what we have with Sitchin is intellectual dishonesty. Instead of publishing that he was wrong and retweaking his chronologies, he didn't want to do that because then he would offend the uniformitarian view, the great scientific authorities that claimed that everything had to have happened in hundreds of thousands of years, that none of these things could have happened in an abbreviated period of time of 12 centuries.
522 is a very unique year in world history. You see right here, where I have this white box, 522 is the only year in world history that Phoenix and the Nemesis X object appear in the inner system together. Here is Phoenix in 522, here is Nemesis X object in 522. We don't know which caused which, but this is when the Dark Age began over Europe. C.E. Britton on his writings on the reign of Octa of Kent in the Welsh Annals records earthquakes and sky dragons and monsters battling in the sky. 522 is the 60th year of the Nemesis X object in the inner system. Earthquakes devastated Olympia, Greece. Sky dragons were seen over Britain. A celestial war of monsters raining great drops of blood, followed by famine. The old records of Kent record that a strange star appeared attached to a light ray that ended in a flaming dragon. Like I said, the Dark Ages begins here at 522. It is the only year in world history these two objects are seen at the exact same time. In the Old Britain record, it is claimed a celestial war of monsters. This implies visibility on two separate objects or more. During this 60-year presence, the Mosh culture of Peru absolutely vanishes. It is an anthropological mystery.
We have previously shown how so many ancient calendars and civilization start dates began all around 3100 BC. In fact, archaeologists have marveled at the sudden transition from Neolithic culture to full-fledged civilization in Egypt at this time. In 3113 BC, the Mayan long count calendar began. Ivar Zapp and George Erickson in the year 1998 wrote that it is apparent that some major event of worldwide import occurred at this date, that it must have involved a celestial observation to have so influenced sky watchers around the world to have acted as a catharsis for a new age. These sky watchers of the Maya believed in 7 creator gods under the primordial god, Hunabku, much as the Sumerians regarded the 7 Anunnaki builder gods. Astrophysicist Tom Ray of Dublin Institute for the Advanced Studies discovered that light would penetrate the back wall of the famous Newgrange vault exactly 5,150 years ago at the exact moment the sun emerged. This is in the book Feats and Wisdom of the Ancients. This time indicates the year 3162, which virtually aligns with the other pre-Cataclysm calendars that all began circa 3100 BC. Charcoal samples taken from Newgrange's ancient caulking of the roof slabs date to about 3100 BC.
We have to understand that basically by modern authors, we've been hoodwinked. The sensationalist claims of Zecharia Sitchin and many of his followers, they're just not justified. They're not found in the historical record. They're not found in the archaeological record. They're not found in the traditional record. They're modern day inventions, pretty much postulated by 2, 3, or 4 people and picked up by hundreds and believed by millions. Now, I have criticized those modern authors who have used Egyptian dating so carelessly to justify their beliefs or agendas that the Atlantis story of Solon and Plato has this great civilization thriving 9,000 years. That's a long time. 9,000 years before Solon, or about 9,500
BC, 9,500 BC. So, I have cited Eudoxus and others that corrected Plato's dating but are ignored by modern authors who like this fantasy world Atlantis scenario. In my own research, I show that the 9,500 years is actually reduced by Egyptian reckoning to the 13th or 14th century BC, where we have an epic Mediterranean cataclysm caused by the Phoenix, very well documented. And the whole entire Atlantis story could have very well been true, but it would have happened in that region of the world. The Straits of Gibraltar, right there in the Atlantic, maybe around the Canary Islands, all the way into the Mediterranean. But chronologically, we know it wasn't 9,500 BC. It can't be, because the Greek nation that they were at war with didn't exist at that time. There was no ancient Egypt to have recorded this at that time. The whole thing is ridiculous.
The two religious vantage points of the early Sumerians finally merged into a singular faith that paved the way for the actual return of these beings that anciently masqueraded as gods. Two disparate belief systems merged into one. And golden plates from the city of Ur have been found, and they read, "Gods in the form of men came down." These gods were thought to have been sent by Anu, god of heaven and ruler among the stars. To the Sumerians, Earth was called Ki, later to become regarded as a goddess like Mother Earth, Gaia. In this Near Eastern ideology, the descent of these beings from Anu to Ki was the joining of heaven to earth to produce the race that was called Anunnaki, which literally means from heaven to earth. Although Anu was the god of heaven, there was another called Enlil, Lord Wind, an obscure deity originally worshipped by the Sumerians, who is responsible for flooding the earth, and he is the greatest link between the earliest Sumerians and their Hebrew descendants, who remembered him in the scripture